Excellent. All right. Well, there we go. I think that was good enough. That was pretty good. All right. So we're going to be recording a narration, the Battle of Leningrad, I believe. So, let's do it up. I think it's, oh my God, I think it's 1N. I think it is. Oh, all right, so we got all our levels. We're going to get our script going here. I got everything all nice and ready to go. And feel free to knock any comments if anybody joins me on Twitch here. Throw them up. I'll get to them ASAP. I don't have chat. I don't have my chat popped out, but oh my God, my water. I need my water. Oh well. But I got my I got chat up on the phone over here, so I can definitely take some questions if anybody throws them out to me. All right, so we are going to record. Siege of Leningrad, September 8th, 1941 through January 27th, 1944. World War II. Leningrad was one of the main objectives of the German invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941. The conquest of Leningrad was not just an operational request of the German HQ. Hitler also saw the symbolic significance of the city of Lenin, the father of the Soviet Union. Conquering the city would have been a massive blow to morale for Soviets, which was already weakened by huge German successes on the front. Furthermore, Hitler wanted the city razed to the ground, its population killed or driven further east as part of his Generalplan Ost. Generalplan Ost. I don't know if I want to do a German accent, but we'll have it either way. However, Joseph Stalin, the leader of the Soviet Union, also realized the importance of Leningrad, both strategically and symbolically, and stated that it could not fall into German hands. Surrounding the city. Conquest of Leningrad was the objective of Army Group North, under command of Field Marshal von Lieb. It consisted of the 18th Army, led by Field Marshal Georg von Kuschler, let me do that whole line over again. It consisted of the 18th Army, led by Field Marshal Georg von Kuschler, the 4th Panzer Group, and the 16th Army. At the beginning, the Germans actually had no difficulty in fighting against the Soviet 8th and 11th Armies at the Northwestern Front. July 10th, Kuschler managed to push Soviet troops out of Baltic states, forcing them into defensive operations to save the Leningrad. The Leningrad? Yeah, that should be just Leningrad, I believe. By July 10th, Kuschler managed to push Soviet troopers. By July 10th, Kuschler managed to push Soviet troops out of Baltic states, forcing them into I'll get through it. I will get through this one. By July 10th, Kuschler managed to push Soviet troops out of Baltic states, forcing them into defensive operations to save Leningrad from being surrounded. Bit of a pregnant pause there, but I'll take that out in editing. The Soviets, meanwhile, never managed to halt the German attacks and were constantly forced to retreat to new defensive positions. While the German 18th Army was marching towards Leningrad, the 4th Panzer Group was making important progress. The 4th Panzer Group was making important progress towards Luga and Novgorod. I forgot the pronunciation of Novgorod. Do I want to do Russian? Novgorod. Let's do that whole thing over. While the German 18th Army was marching towards Leningrad, the 4th Panzer Group was making important progress towards Luga and Novgorod, and then move further towards Lake Ladoga. I'm going to do that whole goddamn thing over again. This is a good one. Lots of L's. While the German 18th Army was marching towards Leningrad, the 4th Panzer Group was making important progress towards Luga and Novgorod, and then move further towards Lake Ladoga in order to cut off Leningrad from the rest of the country. On August 30th, Germans reached the Neva River, which allowed them to start bombing. On August 30th, Germans reached the Neva River, which allowed them to start bombing Leningrad. The first bombs dropped on Leningrad on September 4th, 1941. On September 8th, 1941, the German forces managed to reach the shores of Lake Ladoga, which meant that the city was cut off by land. The siege would begin. From the north, Leningrad was attacked by the Finns, Germany's allies. Their offensive eventually proved to be a huge problem for the Germans, as the Finns were satisfied with reclaiming the territories lost in the 1939 Winter War and not pushing further onto the city itself. This would prevent a complete encirclement around the city. Their refusal to cross the border would allow the defenders of Leningrad to resupply over Lake Ladoga during the siege. Their refusal to cross the border would be allowed by the defenders of Leningrad. Their refusal to cross the border would allow the defenders of Leningrad to resupply over Lake Ladoga during the siege. The siege of Leningrad. As a consequence of allowing the Germans to surround Leningrad, the Soviet commander of the Northwestern Front, General Clement Voroshilov, General Clement Voroshilov, I'm going to get that right. Russian is not my forte. General Clement Voroshilov. General Clement Voroshilov was replaced with the more capable General Georgy Zhukov. I know Georgy Zhukov. General Clement Voroshilov was replaced with the more capable General Georgy Zhukov, who quickly organized the defense of Leningrad. The whole civilian population of Leningrad was organized into building defensive positions. Leningrad was completely surrounded with obstacles and trenches. 190 kilometers of wooden obstacles, 635 kilometers of barbed wire, 700 kilometers of anti-tank trenches, and 2,500 kilometers of ordinary trenches. After a month of constant artillery preparation and bombardment, the Germans were eventually ordered not to mount a full-scale assault on the city, as they believed it would cost them too many lives. Hitler's directive from October 7, 1941, ordered German troops to hold the city under siege, therefore starving the Soviet defenders to death. However, the Germans did not expect such a heroic resistance by the Leningrad defenders. The siege would last for 872 days, during which citizens were severely lacking food, water, energy, heating, and medicine. By the beginning of winter, Leningrad lost around 50,000 lives. The arrival of winter caused Lake Ladoga to become frozen, which allowed the Soviets to establish a corridor over to it, to get much-needed supplies into the city. Over to it, not over to it. The arrival of winter caused Lake Ladoga to become frozen, which allowed the Soviets to establish a corridor over it. That's weird, a corridor over it. Yeah, okay. The arrival of winter caused Lake Ladoga to become frozen, which allowed the Soviets to establish a corridor over it. There's a comma is in the wrong spot. That's what it is. The comma is in the wrong spot, and there's an extra 2. All right, that's what's throwing me off. The arrival of winter caused Lake Ladoga to become frozen, which allowed the Soviets to establish a corridor over it, to get much-needed supplies into the city. This ice corridor was remembered as the Road of Life, and it served not only to bring supplies into the city, but to also evacuate civilians to safety. But also to evacuate civilians to safety. The road was, however, a constant target of the German Luftwaffe, so transport of goods and people was a dangerous venture. Nevertheless, great famine remained present during the entire siege, and it was the reason for the majority of the casualties. And at some point, citizens were allowed a daily portion of only 125 grams of bread made of flour and sawdust. On some days, not even that. Despite all the atrocities, city authorities were persistent in keeping morale as high as possible. Stalemate of the siege was occasionally interrupted by several Soviet attempts to break it. The first one was in late summer 1942, when Soviet troops from the east started an offensive in order to connect with Leningrad defenders. At the same time, the Germans were preparing an offensive to capture the city without awareness of the Soviet plans. When the Soviets attacked, the German forces had to abandon their plans, but managed to repel the enemy away from the city. The next attempt to break the siege was more successful. On January 12, 1943, the Red Army commenced a full-scale offensive on German positions on the south bank of Lake Ladoga. After a week of heavy fighting, the Soviets managed to destroy German positions. After a week of heavy fighting, the Soviets managed to destroy... I can't get managed to destroy out of my face. After a week of heavy fighting, the Soviets managed to destroy German positions and to establish a land route with Leningrad, allowing more supplies into the city. A year later, in January 1944, when it became obvious that German ambitions in the Soviet Union were doomed, Red Army units started a new offensive that resulted in a complete lift of the siege. During the 872 days of the siege, from September 8, 1941 to January 27, 1944, more than 1 million of the Leningrad defenders and citizens lost their lives. Most of the deaths were due to great famine, but shelling and air bombing took their toll as well. Most of the deaths were due to great famine, but shelling and air bombing took their toll as well. I think that works for me. All right, so we're going to get some room tone. Let me clean all that up. I'm going to go back. And this is where it gets pretty boring for everybody. I think that works. Room tone. Works for me. 10 seconds. Oh, really? So, live. Look at this. So, Adobe Audition has stopped working. So you're probably like, oh no, what's going to happen? But thankfully, Adobe Audition saves everything for me. And I'm not really sure why that crashed either. Normally it doesn't crash like that. Very rarely does it crash on me. So we're going to get in there and definitely save it to make sure. And this is going to be the Battle of Leningrad. I'm going to go into my little simple history folder here. Oops. The Battle of Leningrad. And we're going to save that as a, well, that's pretty big, 273.21, which is pretty big. And the way we write, or the way Dan writes a script is a little bit, it's not really in script or voiceover format. It's more of in a narrative format. So it's tough to get always on our first take, but let's save that down as a clean track. All right. That's the way I do it. I have edited and cleaned, then pretty much processed, and that's it. We're going to apply that. That's going to take a minute or two. A minute? Yeah, like 2 minutes. So I'm going to stretch. Oh, yeah, a little sleepy. A little sleepy. Man, when I do this, I always want to have background music playing, but it's tough to speak over background music, especially when it's doing this kind of stuff. But let's yeah, that's a good one. I like that one. I could just literally sit here all night and play with sound effects. Maybe I should do that. Just have a sound effects evening where I'm basically doing a drama, audio drama with sound effects. All right. All right, that's all she wrote. Siege of Leningrad. That's all she wrote. So that's a processed, finished track. And we're going to call this Final, not Z Final, Final. The Battle of Leningrad, down to 133 megs. So not too bad. So yeah, that's fine by me. All right, so thank you for those who stuck through to the end here, which was pretty much nobody, which is totally fine. If anybody has any questions, feel free to hit me up on Twitter. If anybody needs some questions answered about the Adobe Audition. So that's all she wrote. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for hanging out. Please have a good morning, good evening, or good afternoon, wherever you are. That's it. See ya.